What does a doctor mean when he tells a family there's nothing left to hope for? Romanov was brain dead. That's not a phrase doctors use lightly. It means the machines are the only thing left doing any work. It means you start preparing a family for goodbye, not for hello. Years later, he was helping me carry supplies down the hall. I want to tell you what happened in between. Because it wasn't a miracle. It was slower, harder, and stranger than that. The surgeon who operated on him that night was an experienced, older neurosurgeon I'd worked alongside for years. We'd been in countless operating rooms together. He told me much later that he hadn't believed Romanov would recover the way he did. Not fully. Not close to it. And he still says to this day that the brain is a marvel he finds himself newly fascinated by again and again. Not once, not as a phrase, he repeats. Daily. A man who had spent decades with his hands inside human skulls, still catching himself amazed. That stayed with me. The human brain is the product of roughly 500 million years of evolution. We've built artificial intelligence that can write, calculate, and generate images in a matter of decades. A blink by comparison. And yet AI still hasn't matched what a damaged human brain can do when it's given enough time. Quietly rebuild itself, one connection at a time, without anyone fully understanding how. For years, scientists believed something simple. More brain activity meant more blood flow to that area. Straightforward. Measurable. Then, in 2025, researchers at the Technical University of Munich and the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg found that this wasn't quite right. The brain doesn't just pull in more blood when it works harder. It uses the oxygen it already has more efficiently. The activity was never really about supply. It was about how well the brain manages what it's already got. I think about Romanov every time I hear that. Because that's exactly what his recovery looked like from the outside. Nothing was flooding back in all at once. He was learning to use what little was still working more efficiently, day after day, for longer than most people would have had the patience to watch. He told me once how long it took just to walk again. Not to walk well. To walk at all. Weeks became months. Every step had to be relearned, the way you'd teach a body a language it had forgotten it ever knew. And through all of it, he blamed himself. He told me that plainly, without asking for sympathy. Too much alcohol. Too much partying. Too much of everything that wasn't good for him. He didn't dress it up. He didn't look for someone else to hold responsible. He just said it, the way you'd read out a bill you knew you owed. I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him it wasn't his fault, or that it was. That wasn't my place. What I noticed instead was what he did with that responsibility once he'd named it. He didn't disappear into the guilt. He used it as a starting point. There's a strange kind of humility built into brain science itself. Even now, with functional MRI scans and artificial intelligence helping researchers process enormous amounts of data, the brain remains difficult to fully read. We can see its structure with remarkable clarity. What it's actually doing, moment to moment, still requires interpretation, still resists easy answers. A few years ago, a Nobel Prize went to a researcher named Adem Pataputian for discovering how something as simple as touch, pressure on skin, stretch in the stomach, gets translated into an electrical signal the brain can use. One of the most basic things your body does, and it took until recently for anyone to fully explain how. The brain studying itself is its own kind of paradox. Structures show up clearly on a scan. What's actually happening inside them stays harder to read. Romanov's brain relearned how to move a body it had nearly lost control of completely. Nobody could tell him exactly how long it would take, because nobody fully understands the mechanism well enough to promise a timeline. He just kept going. Slower than he wanted. Longer than anyone around him expected. Today, he's not fully healthy. Not in the way people usually mean that word. He tires faster than most. Some days he has to leave early, which isn't simple to plan around with fixed shift schedules. Nobody pretends that's convenient. But the team has learned something worth learning. It doesn't help anyone if he pushes through and makes a mistake because he's exhausted. So he helps out where he can. Nothing dramatic. Carrying things, showing up, being useful in small, ordinary ways for as long as his body allows it that day. He'll tell you himself that things are moving upward now. Not because something fixed him, but because he kept doing the unglamorous work of rebuilding, one day at a time. I don't know exactly what happens inside a brain that comes back from where his did. Neither really does the science. What I know is what I watched. A man who named his own responsibility without flinching, and then spent years proving that naming it wasn't the end of the story. If a brain the machines had already given up on could find its way back, one connection at a time, with no one fully understanding how. What does that say about the things you've already decided are beyond repair?